Right, you're very welcome along. It's Friday Nights Off the Ball. I'm Ger Gilroy here with you all the way through until 10. Will is here. Will, good evening to you. How are you?
Good.
Some minor difficulties getting into work today, apparently.
Yeah, left home thinking I was early, Ger. Thinking I'm going to get ahead of the day. And next thing, it's like, the train's going to be 15 minutes early. I was told I get to stare 15 minutes late when I got to the station. Thought 15 minutes, no problem. I'm 2 trains early. I'll relax, sit down, have a quick look at the papers. Upshot is I arrive about 90 minutes after the train I normally get would have been planned. It took about 3 hours to get to work.
It was an Irish 15 minutes.
It really
15 minutes. Are you there? 15 minutes away. Yeah. Okay. Mick, good evening.
Hello, Ger. How are you?
I'm very well. What's the crack?
Got into work nice and easy this morning. Bus came when it was supposed to arrive, possibly a couple of minutes earlier than I usually do on a Friday.
Public transport's very important. There you go. That's your
varying experiences of this morning.
It's true. If you want to get in touch, 53106 is the text number, or of course you can always tweet us at Off the Ball. Now, before we get into our content, we have Joel Stransky coming up to preview Ireland against the hammering that they're going to give us. Is the general sense I'm getting from the Springboks that they're quietly confident about this? It's like the revenge game for the game that we beat them so badly in,
which inspired their World Cup success.
That we turned Razzie Rasmussen on. Come and save us, Razzie. Look, you're working in Irish rugby, and your team isn't even the best. You must be amazing. Come back.
So what you're saying is they don't thank us for being the catalyst for their success. No. They say we have to come full circle by destroying those minnows who made a fool of us.
Yeah, and look, this far out from the World Cup, that'll be okay. I think the memory of the pounding we took from England that ruined everything in the February before the previous World Cup, that still lingers. Previous November, we were doing this to South Africa.
Yeah. Amazing.
All right. Was that in the year?
I definitely don't. I was thinking, beating South Africa tomorrow, not the most important thing with the World Cup. It's about being able to live with them and compete and all, but we just don't want to go down that spiral of 2018 again. It's almost too fresh, isn't it? The negative momentum.
It is. And look, it's hard to argue with the importance of the wins and the sense of confidence and everything that comes from that. But it seems like we have a deeper pool of players. It seems like the A team plays in the same style of play as the senior team, and everything seems to be simpatico at the moment.
The fall off also happened a lot later last time around for the 2018-19 cycle. It was only really around the start of the Six Nations that people started to go, that wasn't the best performance against England, but there's plenty of time to turn it around. We were really good in the November internationals the year before the World Cup run, but we beat the All Blacks.
Yeah.
So I don't agree too much into this.
2018 was the Grand Slam. Sorry, it was 2019 Six Nations that we floundered.
Yeah. And we were feeling ourselves with Hedgehog can play fullback. He's never done it before, but who cares? He can play under 12s or something. It's grand. It's only England.
Mako and Billy are coming, and
Mako and Billy.
They do things to us that South Africans like to do as well when they play rugby. So let's see how far we've come.
So that's coming up. Joel Stransky's going to talk to us. He's having some
sundowners, he said to me earlier today, because it's his wife's birthday, but he has taken the time out for OTB, a 1995 World Cup hero, so not a bad guest ahead of the big game tomorrow.
Sundown in Ireland, obviously much earlier these days at the moment, so not as much crack when the rain has been biblical like it was all week. Clive Allen is going to talk to us about the weekend's big games, some proper big games this weekend in the Premier League as well. We have a crappy quiz including a debutant and some Kelly Harrington goodness coming your way a little bit later on as well. But before all that, we should talk about FIFA. They have today written to all the football teams who have qualified for the World Cup and said, here lads, listen, cool the jets on the old protests and human rights and anything else you might be thinking of, talking about. Don't talk about any of this stuff.
And why not talk about it? Because we have to focus on the festival of football. Let's focus on the football. That's what we're good at. Let's talk about the beautiful game. Everything that goes around with it. Maybe it's unfortunate. Maybe it's not what it is. But none of it's more important than the feast of football that is to come. It's one of those cynical things I've ever come across. I don't know what they're even hoping to achieve by it, because that's going to turn people who don't care about the whole Qatar thing against the World Cup.
I don't know. I think people have made their mind up at this stage, right? And then when the football starts, everybody forgets about it. Sports washing works. Is the long and the short of it. Sports washing works.
Yeah.
That's why it continues to happen. And I didn't hear you guys were chatting about it this week on a slight tangent. And was there a consensus about people boycotting or not boycotting? Will there be more people boycotting as time goes on?
No. Yeah, I think so. I think. The consensus, I think, Will, I don't want to speak for everybody, was that it was we were getting more and more kind of like grossed out by the idea of this World Cup happening the closer it got to it, whereas I think the feeling would have been in months and years past that it would actually be the opposite, that the closer we get to it, the more we put it all out of our mind a little bit and focus on not being able to give up a World Cup, because it's such a big part of our lifespan every 4 years, is that we enjoy and, you know, binge on the World Cup, I suppose. But I don't think boycott would have been in any way near a consensus. Yeah, like, I mean, look, we're all going to be working, we're all going to be watching, so it's not really something that comes up. In terms of like people getting in touch with the show, I don't think it's anywhere near a consensus, but I'm surprised at the amount of people who are adamantly saying, giving a backstory about how much they love football and how much the World Cup means to them, and saying that I cannot participate in this like monstrosity over the next month. So I think we'll experience it more than we expect, but I don't think it'll be anywhere close to a consensus. Now, I think ultimately the vast majority of people will still end up watching the World Cup. It's how they feel about it is the open question.
Yeah, I got a few DMs afterwards from people who had watched the discussion, which was largely along that line, that they were thinking up until quite recently they weren't exactly comfortable with the World Cup, but feel increasingly uncomfortable the closer we get to it. And maybe now that there's perhaps a wider discussion about the 7,000 migrant workers who lost their lives in creating these stadiums which won't be used when the World Cup is finished. And like, you have to wonder about the legacy of a tournament when some of these stadiums are being taken apart afterwards and sold to Saudi Arabia. And then Kieran Cunningham made a very fair point, which was, we kind of discussed maybe major organisations might learn from the bidding process around this. The reality is they won't. When you look at how hard Saudi Arabia are going in right now, cozying up particularly to FIFA and the idea of them potentially even hosting the Winter Olympics in the desert in 10 years' time, it just goes to show that in all likelihood there will be more of these awarded to places that we will have question marks about. And it's left me questioning a bit, Ger, about even Russia in 2018 and the award for that at a time when Russia was being heavily investigated for state-sponsored doping, you know, quite aside from the aggression that Russia had shown in Crimea on the back of major sporting events. Like, there's a million reasons why the 2018 World Cup probably shouldn't have been awarded to Russia either. Yeah. So this isn't just a Middle East thing, but it really leaves you questioning. It leaves you feeling a bit powerless as well, though.
So the feeling of powerlessness is one of the main reasons why people don't do anything and don't protest and don't get involved in changing their lives when, you know, we can't influence climate change. Is generally how people feel, and actually, you know, the only way to genuinely influence climate change is to lobby your politicians to stop allowing the major polluters to pollute. Like, but you can definitely do your own bit to give yourself some moral authority on it. I do think the Russia point is interesting. Maybe people are more aware of what's going on now, but certainly there was less talk in the build-up to Russia about Russia buying those games. Remember, the Russians were awarded at the same time as Qatar.
Yeah, they made those. Day, yeah.
So, you know, you have to assume that the same process, the same corrupt process, was used for both of those, and so it has transpired to be. So, like, I do think that there's probably significantly pronounced more level of scrutiny, given that it is Middle East. I do believe in Orientalism. I do think that is a real thing that happens. It doesn't mean that it's not without moral authority. At the same time, these games shouldn't be happening. They are going to happen. Like the World Cup in 1978 obviously happened against the backdrop of horrific
authoritarian regime.
Yeah, and there are still people who don't know where their children went. They went off to school, they went off to university, and they never came back, and the mothers that disappeared still march to this day in Buenos Aires. But world football came and played great games, and I know Mario Kempes was the top scorer because it's in my World Cup Italia 90 book.
Like, and there's players on that team. Is Passarella, was he? No, I'm confusing players, I think. But anyways, there was an Argentinian famous player who's talked about that, about how the legacy of feeling that win, Argentina winning that tournament, provided legitimacy and celebration for the military regime that had taken over the country, is it weighs on them. You know, and I'm sorry I can't attribute exactly who that was that said it, but I remember it being quite a striking thing. Can I just say that there's one slight difference between, say, Russia and not even going back as far as Argentina, but say even Russia, is like there's a sports watching element to like rogue or unsatisfactory states getting these tournaments that I think is important and should be discussed. But there is also just this added thing here with for me, like there's all the LGBT stuff and Qatar's human rights record and all that. You can link all that stuff with what we're talking about with Russia, say, for example, or Saudi Arabia in the future. But there has to be an extra element to this, in that specifically for this World Cup, and we've known about it for 8 years, as Joe was talking about. Like, I mean, The Guardian broke this story 8 years ago in 2014 about the migrant workers. And now we know, and the more and more we know about it, the more it's like it's over 6. You were saying 7. It's close. It's close to that number now. Have died in the building of this World Cup for this to happen. So this is a very specific football problem that isn't just the World Cup legitimising a bad actor. It's directly contributing to this humanitarian outrage, I suppose, for want of a better word. So I think there is just that extra element to this that we have to consider in legitimising the World Cup by paying attention to it and covering it and giving it its stick to the football, like Gianni Infantino would like to do, us to do. You know.
Well, so I don't think anybody's going to be able to stick to the football over the next while. We are going to stick to the football later when we talk about Clive Allen, and it comes up, and we talk about Newcastle, and but it works over a period of time. It works. Like, there's discussions about live golf that are happening around, like, the money and who won and what kind of form it is, and ultimately, some kind of peace gets made, and Saudi Arabia own a large portion of the secondary golf tour, and Saudi Arabia own a large football club, which
Saudi
is
Arabia
Champions League winning football club.
Invest in a massive social media company this week, and that are doing whatever they're doing. So it's everywhere. It's not just sport, and it's constant.
There you go. And on that cheery note, who's going to win the World Cup, lads? Who's going to win the World Cup? Who do you think's going to win?
Argentina, I think, genuinely.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, what a story it'll be.
I think I don't know who it'll be, but I have this feeling that this sense that Argentina or Brazil are the strongest going into it. It's some pragmatic European team is going to go and win it. I don't know which one.
I do hope that they all wear rainbow laces, and that they all kind of somebody makes a stand, and somebody takes the opportunity, the platform they're given to.
They're not the most high profile, but the Socceroos kicked it off very interestingly with that video.
They did
tackle a lot of issues.
It was great.
Yeah. Well, the Danes, in fairness to them, had been talking about something similar, so it's bubbling up.
You want enough to happen that, like, say, Fox, who've decided not to talk about any off-field stuff as a policy for their coverage of the World Cup in America, are forced into it. I just want the people not to be able to ignore this, so that people can watch the football, they can enjoy the football, but they can't be blind to the fact that all this is happening.
I didn't realise that they made that decision.
That's what we were talking about that in the show during the week. I'm not exactly sure who was saying it, but they've made a kind of a policy decision to not bring up anything outside of the game itself.
Okay, that's interesting. But sure, look, it's what it is, right? Okay, so we've told you about Thierry Henry. We've talked about the FIFA stuff today. We're going to talk to Joel Stransky about the Springboks and what they expect from the game against Ireland tomorrow evening. Kick-off is at 5:30 at Lansdowne Road, the Aviva for that. We'll also bring you Clive Allen's thoughts on the weekend's football and plenty more besides. But now it's time for this.